Hi Robert, you're very welcome back to Capricorn TV for the second time.
It's a pleasure to be back.
Wow, 35 episodes in, Robert. I'm glad to revisit today because we're going to, well, things have actually developed since we last spoke, and I'll refer the viewers to the first episode we did where we got into your career as a review process. However, today, we don't need to revisit the Orion correlation theory in concept, but we are going to talk a bit about the politics that goes on, Robert.
Sure.
The reactions, the emotions, the drama, on the political scene that goes around this research and discovery, Robert. It seems silly that you have to go through this. It seems like it's an enduring process that's very, very difficult. Maybe talk a little bit how that affects you, Robert, because in the alternative research, whatever that is, you seem to have to fight against the academics, and people have been taking potshots of you for quite a long time, Robert. Quite recent ones too.
Well, first of all, I mean, to be realistic, anybody who will propose a new idea, particularly scientific idea, has to be prepared that he's going to face opposition. I mean, and in many ways, it's a good sign. So, from a healthy point of view,
Sure.
If you present an idea which is ignored, in fact, it's a particularly bad sign because the idea doesn't attract the kind of attention it should. So I'm fine with with the criticism that went ahead. What was surprising to me, because I really came from a background that was very, very unused to this kind of politics that goes on. I didn't expect it at all.
Mm-hmm.
I come from a semi-scientific background, which is engineering.
Sure.
And particularly in the construction industry. I worked many, many years in construction, where really you're dealing with people who are very pragmatic, deal with solid evidence, when you're building things, it's things you can touch and measure and so forth. Architects, engineers, structural engineers, civil engineers, electricians, and so forth. So to me, if something is presented in a proper manner,
mm-hmm.
which I thought I was doing, I still do, I was using all the data that needed to be investigated to present this Orion correlation theory. I mean, I had to look into the culture of the ancient Egyptians, the texts, and so forth. So when it came out, it first came out, by the way, in a private manner, because I wrote letters to various top academics, very naively, putting a very summary idea with a few hand drawings in those days,
mm-hmm.
long before computers.
Mm-hmm.
And I got very mixed reactions. Some of them were very rude.
Really?
I got friendly reactions from Dr. Edwards, for example, that eventually encouraged me to publish. But from the British Museum at the time, it was T.G. James who was director, and he kind of said, yes, it's interesting, but, thank you very much, but goodbye type of letter. Jaromir Malik was open. But then suddenly I got a very virulent letter. I won't mention the name because I don't think it's fair, from a Swiss Egyptologist who was working at the time in Egypt,
mm-hmm.
who in no uncertain terms, I mean, he wrote me a 5-page letter. So I thought, I've touched the nerve here, telling me, the background of his pyramid studies, and concluded by saying, I advise you to be a good engineer and forget about it. I took particular offense to this because I was a good engineer. I'm doing very well in engineering.
Sure.
What I was surprised that this was should be, I still believe that it should be an advancement. It's a breakthrough. We were looking at something that wasn't noticed before. So that's how it started. It went quiet because then I published in '89 my first article. Through Professor Edwards, by the way, who by the time I got acquainted to him. And that was it.
Sure.
And the article went in an Egyptological journal. At the time, it was just opening up, discussion in Egyptology. No reaction whatsoever. As if nothing. I mean, no response, no zero, But of course, this is only read in the academic circles. I was in Australia at the time, and when I returned to England in 89, I decided finally I'm going to try and write a book. And I'm not going to bother with the details, but eventually I published the book in 1994, in February 1994. Now, as it turned out, many things were happening in 94. Gantenberg, a few months before, had discovered the door. I got implicated in his discovery with the media and so forth. And the BBC got hold of it. The BBC, at the time, there was a department that were thinking of, very keen on opening a new documentary department. It became to be Ancient Voices. The BBC did not have a documentary department in those days.
Sure.
And they were very keen on this idea. They thought it'd make a good pilot, combining the discovery of the door with the theory of the correlation and so forth. And the luck of the gods was on my side because they took it very seriously, and eventually they broadcasted on the night of the launch of the book, which was the 7th of February, 94. So the book was out. It had been announced in the Radio Times, front cover of this business. So of course it attracted a lot of attention. I mean, when the program came out, 2 days later, the publishers were overwhelmed. They had sold 40,000 copies.
Wow.
It was plastered all over So of course it was seen by everybody. And of course by the Egyptologists. And that's when it started getting nasty. I was amazed at the anger that I'd aroused. The BBC called me and said, this incredible, Robert, what have you done? They kept getting phone calls from universities and professors and saying, how did you allow this charlatan, this sort of stuff? And
Robert, I mentioned that because I've recently seen The Universe Season 8, Episode 2, and The Universe Season 8, Episode 2. And it seems to be that this era in the early 90s has been repeated again by a certain individual.
Kind of. With less aggressivity, but yes. Well, what happened it was late 90s, as a matter of fact. The aggression came from the book, mainly because it received so much media attention. It started getting nasty when Graham and I got together, because Graham also had published Fingerprints of the Gods, which got a lot of attention. And then we published Keeper of Genesis. And although we got very nice reviews, we're, in the Times and so forth, but it was beginning to look nasty a bit. There was, Graham in particular, there was a full cover in the Sunday Times culture section. I don't think it exists anymore, but they had a culture review in those days with the title, Silly Theories of the Sand, and why are we told such nonsense? This is front cover Sunday Times, at the highest of level. So we were both baffled by this. Where it really got nasty is when finally BBC decided with the Horizon program to do this twin program, Atlantis Rediscovered, it was called. No, Atlantis Uncovered and Atlantis Reborn. Yes. Yeah. It's the Atlantis Reborn one. Because the first program, they were kind of playing along, they were reviewing the theories, but then suddenly came the surprise. How this started, in fact, is that Graham was approached by Horizon, and they said, well, can you put us in touch with Robert Bauval, and sure. I was in Egypt at the time, and they were very keen to interview me. Graham had asked them, of course, was this going to be a fair program and all this? And of course, yes, we are Horizon. But it all was a setup. There was no doubt about it.
Premeditated.
Oh, no doubt about it, because they had two well-known skeptic critics from the PSYCOP organization. This is one of the top skeptical organizations. Very nasty. They had a history of well, yes. They made it the business to debunk what they call debunking, what they consider pseudoscience. And we were on the hit list, no doubt. Mainly because of the attention. In their mind, they were protecting the public from pseudoscience. So this program went ahead, and boy, it was a shock, because we were assured. We were assured by the BBC producer at the time, a fellow called Chris Mann. Chris Mann was the BBC in 94. Chris Hale. And a young man called Julian Hudson, if I remember well. They were assured us, or because of course we didn't want to go and be debunked. We knew who was going to be on this program without probably responding. And the shock came when, I was watching the program and they had Ed Krupp coming, as you know, this astronomer from the Griffith Observatory from Los Angeles, saying I'd put maps upside down. There on prime time BBC, with millions of people watching.
Which went unchallenged, Robert. That went unchallenged, I believe.
Well, it went unchallenged because my response that I had given in Egypt to this critical point was not aired. Wow. Not aired at all. And, I was there watching my wife and friends, don't worry, I'm going to come afterwards and explain this. And didn't show it. And the next day, hell broke loose because, of course, I got contacted. But I was surprised at the support I had. Hence, Chandra Wickramasinghe. I was contacted by top astronomers, physicists from Cambridge University, from the Cavendish Laboratory, from Cardiff University, Chandra Wickramasinghe, from Plymouth University, Percy Seymour. They all phoned me because they had put my name, saying, well, what's this? If you want our support, we'll.
Incredible.
So I asked them all to write a statement from what they saw to the BBC, which they did, and you read my appendix, which will be published. But this was put on air, by the way. And of course, the matter was taken to the Broadcasting Standards Commission, which is now called the Broadcasting Commission.
Standard Commission.
They've reduced the title. And it's like a court, and we went there with lawyers and presented the case, and the BBC brought their lawyers and so forth. And the judge there, I can't remember his name, began to be more and more upset because it was very clear that once they learned that of all the people they could have brought to criticize this, they had to go to America and bring these professional debunkers. It was very obviously a setup. But what was worse is that my response to this, which was taken on camera, was not used. And the BBC tried to say that they didn't actually record it. I remember at the time they were playing around saying, well, bad luck for them. I happen to have had a friend of mine, the writer John Lash, during the recording that filmed on my camera with sound. So they knew I had the recording. So finally the lawyers managed to get the transcript. And it was very obvious from the transcript that I had given a proper response to this, which they obviously deliberately did not use. So that's when the judge got very upset, and he asked, I remember this distinctly, this was a moment I'll never forget, when the judge said, well, Mr. Bauval not only gave a response, but Mr. Bauval also suggested that several astronomers, because at the time I knew Archie Roy and Mary Brooke, were willing to come on the show to talk on his behalf, to give response to this. So why didn't you use, for example, Dr. Archie Roy, who had actually offered officially? And the lawyer at BBC said something very stupid. He said, but I'm told that the astronomy of Dr. Archie Roy is outdated. Wow. So the judge said, in what way? The stars look the same, What is outdated about it? And he said, well, he's an old astronomer, and he really got upset. And we knew we had won the case. And
you won the case, Robert, but did you actually feel vindicated by the published response?
Well, it got a bit diluted because, unfortunately, Graham had put many, many complaints. It's very difficult to prove. I'm one of these guys because I worked in arbitration before, and I told Graham at the time that let's win on just one point, and we win. We don't need to have, we don't need to kill the goat 10 times to say we killed it. And but he was very sore about many other points, but they were a bit difficult to prove, and therefore these did not go through. But the Orion correlation went very clear. There was no doubt that they considered it unfair and they made an excuse. In fact, what happened afterwards is that not only they had to publish the summary of the adjudication in the Times, where they gave us a choice of newspaper, of course, we did the Times, and they had to publish a fairly large segment. And then when they rebroadcasted, as you know, they do this kind of reading. Mm-hmm. They had to read the adjudication before they broadcasted. So it was quite a defeat for the Horizon program.
Never been done.
Never done this before. So in many ways, but the trouble is this. You know, what really annoyed me is that I realized that, it was very unfair. There was no doubt about it. You know, to go on air and say I put maps upside down was really below the belt, because the way that he wanted to present it, without further explanation, he just saw two maps and said this points north. Well, yes, you can say this, except that if he explained that what he was saying is that you had to see the stars from behind, you know, it's ridiculous, and draw them and project them around. This is not, nobody would do this. Mm-hmm. In fact, had there been a case, remember that this was 1999, the Orion mystery had been published in 1994. I mean, every single astronomer in the world knew about this. Top astronomers, nobody said anything about this. He just waited for Ed Krupp to say it. Clearly, he was the sole person who saw it this way. But they found the trick, if you like. It was spanner in the wheel type of thing. So I really began to realize that one had to be particularly careful. And you know how Zahi Hawass, I mean, I've been accused of worse things than that. Mm-hmm. It's a very strange thing. Mm-hmm. It's a very strange thing that there is a sector of the academic, and let's not just say academic, I call it the paradigm. You know, it doesn't involve just academics. There are professional archaeologists, there are professors at university. It involves what people, the segment that consider that a paradigm has been threatened. The paradigm, for example, of chronology, that there isn't a previous phase, or the paradigm that there is a higher technology. These are paradigms that are set, and that they're controlled. They're controlled not just by the academics, by the way, because they have a limited way to control it. The way to control it, yes, the media. And this is where I learned. This is where we learned from the time that all this was coming out, that CSICOP, the Committee of Paranormal Investigation, mm-hmm. that Ed Krupp belonged to, had formed a department which was called the Council of Media Integrity, that was specially designed for this kind of purpose, to use media at highest level. We're talking about the Scientific American, Nature, all the scientific media, to block what was considered to be pseudoscience. In other words, there are people who decide what is right and wrong, what is scientific or not, and they block publication. And this is all wrong. I mean, this is really science gone the wrong way. This is the Spanish Inquisition, if you like. The participation of the BBC in all this whole saga it's not what anybody in Britain thinks of the BBC. I mean, this was a major egg on the face for the BBC. Major. Yes, it is. And you know, what Graham and I have done, because I always associate Graham to this period, of course, we were operating together and we fought all these battles together. I think what we managed to do, including Robert Schoch, by the way, because he got the same treatment with his geological case, is we flushed it out. You know, we brought these academics out of their ivory tower because nobody was hearing about this. And this was already one big step, because you know, we got them angry. That was a good thing. And we flushed them out to respond. Mm-hmm. And the more they responded with arbitrary arguments rather than looking at the scientific arguments, the more they shot themselves in the foot. Mm-hmm. You know, saying charlatan, madman, the sort of pseudoscience, you know, pseudo-archaeology, all these words that begin to be flying. The public began to see through this stuff. Mm-hmm. In other words, the man in white, the so-called experts, were beginning to lose the power that they thought they had, the power of authority. Mm-hmm. And it's very strange that, you know, 20 years later, this has become now very few people in the public, I think, accept simple authoritative statements. Who has really spoiled it, by the way? Zahi Hawass, because now nobody listens to this kind of authoritative saying, this is not true. No. Argue on the same level. If you want to say this is not true, show us the evidence. Sure. Let's focus on Edwin Krupp for a moment. He's wrote some pretty nasty, if you would call it that, or very vindictive theoretical arguments against you, Rob. It seems crazy that he will try to do this again on a recent program in 2015, 20 years later, Rob. No, it doesn't seem crazy at all. Well, I don't know. No. Ed Krupp has by the way, it isn't just the upside down thing. Mm. You know, he took it, if I'm not mistaken, and of course I will reserve what I say here because I don't have 100% proof. But Ed Krupp, who was, I think, a member of PsyCop since the early or late 70s, certainly by the early 80s was a member. So he's been a member for a long time. When they formed in 96, so this was at the very height of all these things. I published in 94, Graham published in 95, and in 96, they formed the committee, the Council of Media Integrity, and he was one of the founding members, with John Matrix and a few others. With this particular mission to block and to use media. And that was the integrity of the media. Sure. So I find it strange that he came out immediately after this to attack the Orion thing. It looks like he was assigned as part of this organization to use the astronomy to attack this. He will of course deny it, and I don't want to get into this. But he began to be not just technically against it. I mean, he was trying to laugh it off. I mean, this was very bizarre. I mean, he kept saying things like, we can have the 3 blind mice and the 3 musketeers looking like the pyramids and rubbish like this. I remember because I corresponded with him for a while, he would always sign at the bottom with a little joke, keeping the pyramids, keeping Orion upside down. He would have little jibes at the end. Yes. I found it strange, he's trying to sort of laugh it off, and as if it's not worthy. But clearly, if it was something that wasn't worth attacking, that's what makes it interesting. The attacks were so vicious and violent. It's because we have pressed the button here. You have threatened the paradigm, and that is the truth here. We've really brought these guys out at the highest of level to respond.
Like any theory, Robert, regardless of whether it's an alternative archaeoastronomy theory or something recent or modern, whatever it is, it has to be to stand the test of time. It must be either falsified or not. Maybe just tell the viewers about that and where the Orion correlation theory is today.
I was about to tell you something else about Ed Krupp. People don't know this, but it was because at the time, much of the discussion that was going on was on a discussion board, by the way. There were several discussion boards, and one of them, which at the time was extremely popular, was a board called the MATS discussion board. I don't know if it still exists now, and Graham Hancock's message board. Mm-hmm. And all these critics, debunkers came and attacked Graham on this board, which was quite open. And that's where the discussion of Ed Krupp on this upside down became discussed after the program. But then Ed Krupp wrote another article attacking the theory of the Sphinx astronomically, because of my Leo-Orion correlation. Mm-hmm. And the way that he wanted to find the fault was using the Dendera zodiac, because I had shown that we know that Egyptologists have set on a belief that the Egyptians did not know or did not follow the constellation of the zodiac, that it was imported by the Greeks in the 4th century, or Babylonian zodiac. Yeah. Whereas it was very obvious to me that they had followed, well, not necessarily the zodiac, but they had followed the position of the sun at the stations, the solstices, and had noticed the constellations that marked those spots at various times. It was very obvious to me, and particularly Leo. Mm-hmm. So I had shown that on the Dendera zodiac and on New Kingdom drawings, there was a lion shown in the northern sky that appeared to be the constellation of Leo, which of course brought the idea of the Egyptians long before, in the New Kingdom, long before the Babylonian zodiac. Now, he was arguing that the lion that was shown on the New Kingdom was not Leo, because on the Dendera zodiac there was another little lion. This is very interesting, by the way, because you're going to love this. There was another little lion shown on a constellation that represented the Big Dipper, which was the thigh. Yeah. You can see it on the Dendera zodiac. And there's a little animal there, and he said, no, this is the lion that is in the New Kingdom. I said, and the argument started there. So he published this with a picture. And I knew that he had made a fatal mistake. And I coaxed him into the argument. I'm very nasty this way. So I got him arguing openly on this is a line, this is not a line, this is a line, this is not a line. And I kept saying, no, it is not a leonine figure. This is a bovine. Whatever it is, it's either a goat or a... No, it's a line, it's a line, it's a line. Until finally I brought out the trump card. I said, well, Ed, you haven't looked properly. Look very properly at the animal and its front legs. Now, leonine or felines, if you like, cannot bend the legs inwards. It's a zoological fact. Yeah. Whereas all the bovines, as you know,
they can. Horses
and lambs and cows, when they sit, they bow their legs inwards. And that animal had the leg inward. So that's it. There's no argument there. Wow. When he was caught with that, amazingly, he suggested, I mean, he wouldn't admit that he was wrong. I mean, we had somebody against the wall. There was checkmate. What he said was unbelievable. And even his supporters began to say, well, what's going on? Because he said, well, it might be a lion with broken legs.
Really?
This is it. I stop here. No. He went to consult his zoologist to see if there was some way a lion could have broken legs. It's unbelievable. So that's it. I stopped. And from that moment, Ed Krapp was out of my life. So we have a problem here. We have a problem. Not only that there is this kind of skeptical attitude with trying to find debunking faults, but when you finally prove a point, they won't admit it. I mean, it's like you're going to kill them to admit they were wrong. And I'm not the only one. I mean, you have Robert Schoch, you have geology, you have Chandra Wickramasinghe, I mean, one of the top cosmologists. We've all faced this. You know, there's something that needs to be understood, and it's very hard to get to grips with it if you haven't lived it through, like we have. It's very unfortunate, but it's human nature. You know, we're seeing what we saw in the Renaissance, where there was an establishment.
Which ones?
The church. The church that set on what they believed, or they insisted, was the truth. This is it. No matter what argument you want to bring. And when finally the arguments became so convincing, proved with mathematics, proved with telescopes, but even then, they would sit on it and force the people to recant. Well, of course, this is not happening now. We will not be forced to recant. But we are, in a sense, almost frightened away. Because suddenly we have universities accusing us of this. Zahir once says, I'm a Zionist trying to steal the pyramid. And many people cower away from this. They don't want this kind of aggression. But we've stood our grounds. And this is how you win at this situation. Not because it's just a matter of winning, is that there is a paradigm to change here. And you have to go through these steps. It's one of those unfortunate things, but you have to go through it. It's the way it goes.
Tell us where the Orion correlation theory is today in terms of its a theory being falsified or
you see, process. Any theory, whether it's the Orion correlation theory or anything, any theory that is a scientific theory. We're not talking about philosophical ideas and so on. But if it's a scientific theory, then it has to move from being a theory to find out if there is validity in this theory. So you present a theory, and the theory has to be analyzed. Now, if it has quantities in it, if it has measurements and shapes and things you can quantify, then you pass it through a quantitative test. The Orion correlation, of course, is you have 3 stars, we know the distance of the pyramids, we have the angular distance of the stars, and we can compare. So you can measure it quantitatively. Well, unfortunately, this was not done. It was done, but it was done on the wrong premises. It was done as if we were using high-tech, high-precision instruments. This is our mistake. We're dealing with 5,000-year cult here. So recently it was done on naked eye observation. And it stood the test, the quantitative test. It was done by the Salento University, by proper astronomers, astrophysicists, to be more precise, mathematicians who run the Department of Mathematics and Physics. I mean, we're not talking about amateurs here. And they decided on their own accord to go through a quantitative test and an analytic test, because the quantitative test would prove that it stands the measurement analysis. You measure this, you measure that, and it holds, using the right arguments, the right measurements. allowing for the conditions and so forth and aberrations, all this stuff to be taken into account. And they went to a lot of trouble. The analysis goes to, I don't know, 20 pages of graphs. But then they pass it through a statistical analysis. The statistical analysis, what it does is, there's various methods. The most common one is known as the Monte Carlo statistical analysis. It takes a theory, it takes all the factors that considers the theory, you know, like the texts and whatever, and you pass them through a series of analytical tests, statistical tests, and you see where the needle points. You know, if it points towards the negative, it's no good. If it points above 0, it goes towards the 1 positive. The theory has gone to 1.5, I think, which is quite a lot for this kind of analysis. So the theory has withstood the correct quantitative analytic. They've published it. They've put it on the net. The irony of this is that when they try to publish it in scientific journals,
resistance.
They got the resistance again. But they were new to this business. They were totally baffled. Totally baffled. I mean, and I found that they were trying to contact me desperately through another website, which I don't use very often. I have and finally I got in touch with them. And they were very, very keen to understand why there is this problem. And they were, amazingly, they sent me all the peer reviews, which are unnamed, by the way, because peer reviews don't give the names. They didn't know who they came from, but they were very, very surprised. And the very arbitrary refusals. You know, the stars are not in this, excuse me, things that were not scientific arguments. They would have accepted critical points so that they can amend their article, but to reject it outright on these arbitraries. So they're very, very keen to publish. I understand that they may publish it in an astronomical journal in Italy, so we might have it. But there you go again.
You know,
so the beast hasn't gone yet.
When you find two independent astronomers like that, Robert, getting knee deep in the dogma and the peer review process, and they're getting exposed to their own shortcomings in their own academia, does that satisfy you that the paradigm's changing for different reasons? Other independent people are picking this up, and
you know, I keep saying this, but you actually have to meet this opposition, I mean, face to face, to understand it. There's a lot of stake here, and it isn't just a paradigm, unfortunately. It's people who have put their, have put their reputation on certain conclusions. For example, the Egyptian chronology. It's become like a fact now. You read in textbooks, and virtually all academic Egyptologists have stuck on a chronology. You know, that's it. Egyptian civilization, the first dynasty, around 3000 BC, that's where it started. That's it. And it's mentioned in every single book. Now, anybody who's going to confront this paradigm is bound to get that kind of resistance. So there's a lot of egos involved, there's a lot of politics involved. It seems silly, but it does. You know, I was talking to Chandra Wickramasinghe and saying, he was saying the same thing with cosmology. He said, before you get one of them admitting that he's wrong, you really have to put this back against the wall and face him with evidence, refute him. Even then, it will be argued. It's a very, very hard thing for people to admit they're wrong.
A very slow process, too.
But you have to, it's annoying, it's frustrating, and when it gets nasty, well, I'm called a Zionist and all this rubbish. But you have to develop a rhinoceros skin in this business, and you have to take the punches, because that's how the game is played. And in many ways, yes. I mean, you just can't go there with a new theory and expect everybody to put you a red carpet and clap. So, yes, but you have to hold your ground. You have to hold your ground if, there's one thing interesting about this, is that evidence, if you have good evidence, if there is hard evidence, then no matter how many people don't like it, if this is evidence that is going to bring a truth out, it will do so. It will take 5 years, it will take 10 years, it will take a century, but it will come out. Same thing with the Copernican theory, same thing with many other things. It will come out. So that's it. It may not come in my time, never mind, but it will do so. So it doesn't matter. You don't vote for truth. It doesn't matter how many academics say it's wrong. truth is truth. Something that is factually true, it doesn't matter how people say it isn't. You know, when Copernicus brought the heliocentric theory, or it was published posthumously, all scientists. I mean, it's amazing how many people said it was wrong. They just didn't want to know about it. The church, not just the church, there were scientists in Italy refusing it. It took several decades, slowly, because the evidence could not be refuted.
As John Anthony West would say, truth is not democratic.
Well, it isn't. You know, I mean, we can vote on many things, but you don't vote on truth. You know, I mean, that's it. And you know, and there's another saying which we use very often in these arguments, is that you have to follow the science. You have to follow the science. You don't follow the opinion. And the science doesn't work this way, because Professor so-and-so said this and Professor so. Sure, you take into account, but you have to see what he's taken, whether it stands. This is how we make advancements. Mm-hmm. You know, I mean, we know it all. I mean, before the Wright brothers flew, people say you'll never fly. You know, you can't take metal in the air, and you know, it's things like that. You know, everybody went through this. Everybody went through this. But finally, if it is true, it is true. That's it.
The added bonus to that is, Robert, that archaeoastronomy as a research field has really blossomed outside Egypt as a research field because of what's happened with yourself and the Giza wine theory.
You know, honestly, I don't want to take the credit for this. I mean, we popularized it. Yes, but archaeoastronomy was going on for quite a while. But they too, I mean, there is an argument as who really is the founder of archaeoastronomy. But the one that, in my opinion, gets the credit is Norman Lockyer, when he wrote The Dawn of Astronomy in 1894. But he was pillared. I mean, we're talking about the top. He was the founder of the Nature Science journal, so he was really a heavyweight scientist. But he was pillared. Piazzi Smythe, you know, the Astronomer Royal of Scotland. I mean, they completely ruined his reputation. Egyptologists were not going to have it, you know, because they were questioning certain paradigms. They were questioning chronology. They were questioning when these temples were built. You know, that no Egyptologist before Norman Lockyer had even considered the possibility that these temples were astronomically aligned. Whereas the text begged for this kind of investigation. Sure. You know, so, you know, archaeoastronomy it took a while to, what we did was, the Orion correlation in particular, was to make it popular with the public, and therefore archaeoastronomy became more visible to the public. Sure. And books began to be written and so forth.
Robert, tell us what you're at today. Yourself and Dr. Robert Schock have teamed up for a book. It sounds a very exciting union. Tell us what we can expect there and why the collaboration.
Well, mainly because we both argued with the Keeper of Genesis, The Message of the Sphinx with Graham, and he with his books in the early 90s, that the Sphinx is one example of a prehistoric monument that has been wrongly dated by the establishment. And this caused quite a commotion when this happened. But interestingly, we didn't know each other, by the way, when he did. So we were coming very independently with two hard sciences. There was astronomy and geology that were saying the same thing. So, of course, naturally, we crossed paths. And for a while, you know, we were working quite separately, although we went to conference and so forth. But finally, you know, because he's gone through the same process, I mean, and perhaps even worse, because he's part of the establishment. So, you know, he lives with this all day long, you know, people meet him in the corridors at the university saying, you know, I heard that they say you're crazy and stuff like that. So we finally got together and said, because there's been much that developed, of course, because one of the problems then, on the astronomy, there's been a lot of developments, for example, the Naphtali, which completely changed our perception about what was going on in Egypt before the pharaonic civilization. The astronomy that we found at Giza, for example, is there at Naphtali, which is dated to 7,000 to 8,000, maybe even more, 7,000 BC. So suddenly, alignments to the solstices, to the stars of Orion, to the northern stars were there in prehistoric sites that we didn't know about. So that brought a physical, not just theoretical, a physical example. And of course, Göbekli Tepe, that Schock got involved with. So the argument was, yeah, okay, the astronomy, you present us with a theory that, okay, we can see a bit of the sense, the alignment and so forth. The geology, well, we can argue this and that, but where is the artifacts? Where is the stuff? Because the archaeologists want the stuff. Well, the stuff is there. The Western desert is full of it. Göbekli Tepe is another example. So suddenly there is an issue, and you've seen what Grant showed. I mean, the Scientific American with the civilization may be older. This is quite an admission, considering what they were saying 10 years ago. So what we're doing now is we're reappraising the age of the Sphinx debate, but looking at every single issue that had not been looked at the time. The inscriptions, the geology, of course, again, the astronomy, with new findings. I can't tell you too much because it will take a long time, but there is a lot that confirms astronomically that date, not just the material we published. There is quite a lot. And linking all this up. And responding, by the way, to, as you know, to all the critiques, because at the time, the critiques came afterwards. So all this is coming out and looking very carefully into all this. This is, in my opinion, going to be the definitive textbook, popular textbook, on the debate of an older civilization, which Graham, of course, is coming up with his own book very soon. So, by coincidence, by the way. I mean, so there's going to be again a revival of all these arguments, but this time we know what to expect. At the time we didn't know what was coming our way. So we're being much more cautious, and we're presenting this on a fine-tooth comb. It's a fun book, by the way. It's a fun book because it's amazing how many things were not noticed at the time. We have to admit, I mean, this was early days, but Shock has been 20 years on this business, and so have I. So it's a fun book, and we're very much on the same page. We're sort of brothers in arms on this one, because we know what we know the issue very well, and we know how to deal with it now.
Sure. Do you think perhaps you were a little naive, Robert, going into this whole arena before you exploded on this theory, or Dr. Shock for that matter? Do you think there's any?
I don't think it was naivety. I mean, it was a surprise to me. I mean, to me, scientists were people who would look at calmly at new ideas. I didn't expect the politics. And as you know, I've been involved not just on my case. I've been through it because of the correlation. But I was involved with Rudolf Gantenbrink over the controversy of the door. I mean, we were both baffled, extremely baffled, because I was writing the oil mystery at the time. Why they turned this into a huge political issue that ended up in courts and newspapers. I mean, at the end of the day, the man did them a favor. I mean, he explored the pyramid, he found the door, and you'd think they'd be happy about it. No, there was jealousy and arguments and accusation, and the same old thing, pseudoscientists, amateurs. They got very upset because we spoke to the newspaper. It's very, very strange. And now, as you know, you've been following it, is this so-called cartouche scandal. I mean, at the end of the day, come on. I mean, they didn't assassinate somebody. I mean, they just took a few milligrams, as you know, and they tested it in the scientific way. I mean, they made a big deal out of it. And the nastiness. I mean, it isn't just that they opposed.
Vicious.
Yeah, they came the usual thing, political. The Zionists are involved, and all the nasty political issues that are done in this part of the world. So I've been involved with all these things. It's one of those very strange things, and but then that's the world. The world is made that way. I mean, you have this problem in politics, you have a problem in banking. I mean, it's very strange, but you get this.
Do you think perhaps with the Gantenbrink door, the BBC Horizon scandal, and the cartouche affair, do you think all these scandals that land in your lap, if you want to call it that, Robert, that you develop a skill set to go to war with these guys? Is it just a natural skill set that you develop?
I think what you have to do, I have to admit that at first I was overwhelmed. I mean, mainly because when I published The Orion Mystery, I mean, frankly, I didn't expect it. I honestly did not expect this book to be a #1 bestseller on TV and all this stuff. I mean, I expected some reaction, but not this reaction. So, suddenly I found myself exposed. I mean, I felt like I was walking naked in the street. Even the milkman, had seen the program, and, so it was very strange. And it was overwhelming. I mean, because I got challenges. I was invited at this university, or that radio station, and BBC, and and NBC, and so for a while, and Graham too. I mean, I keep saying this. Through the years, you begin to learn the game. You have to hold your ground, because to me, it's very simple. I presented a case using astronomy, using logic, using the text, that provided strong circumstantial evidence. We don't have the signature of King Cheops to say that's what he wanted to do, but the evidence was very strong and it was presented properly. And the needle points, as we know now, to a non-coincidence. So the onus is on the opposition, if they don't like it, to prove that this is a coincidence. That's what they have to do. They have to prove that this is a coincidence. And the statistics says that they can't. I mean, that's it. And they know it. They know it. They know it, and the problem is because they knew it. They're not stupid. They knew that this was a theory that could not be fought on the statistical issue. And quantitatively, and on the cultural issue, the texts are very clear. The king wants to go to these stars, with the shafts and so forth. So they began to get personal. That's how it starts. And they began to call you an amateur, and it didn't stick. I don't know, many people would have balked at this, but I didn't. Mm-hmm. I got scared at first. I didn't like my name, my family was very upset. I mean, I remember in Egypt, when I was called a Zionist, I had family living there. They didn't like it. But I knew that this was a problem for them. That they just could not knock this theory down on these analysis quantitatively, although they tried, in the angle, all this business. So I took the brunt. And you really have to stick there, because it's nasty, it gets front page accusations, and now, frankly, I mean, if they tell me that Professor and so said I'm a pseudoscientist, it's water on duck's back. I mean, I don't pay attention anymore.
Do you think perhaps, as we've seen with Graham Hancock today, great speech, that places like Gunung Padang and Göbekli Tepe, and then you've got yourself and Dr. Robert Schoch working together, the time is right for a second wave? We have the fall of the Mubarak regime as well, that the time is right for this second wave of... I
don't know about Egypt. I mean, I'm very skeptical about Egypt these days. It's still a long way to see how it's going to stabilize, and not just as a country as a whole politically, but in the antiquity department, there's a cleanup to do there, and I don't think it's going to be soon. But yeah, I mean, I'm hoping that they'll be much more open to, or rather Egyptologists, because really, unfortunately, it's in the hand of Egyptologists, not just the antiquity department. There's all the institute there, there's the French Institute, the German Institute, and they have to open up that it isn't just Egyptology, that there are people, there are astronomers, and even amateurs, provided, of course, that what is done there is done transparently, provided that it's non-intrusive, that you don't go and damage the monuments, but there is no harm at all to go and take alignments and measure this. I mean, it shouldn't turn into politics. I mean, I'm hoping that all these dramas that occurred will remove Egyptology from a political Egyptology. Mm-hmm. That's unfortunately what happened. As far as another wave, yes, I mean, let's see, but I mean, and we didn't plan it. But again, Robert Schoch and I are coming. So there's Schoch, myself, and Graham is publishing his book. So let's see what happens.
Exciting time.
I was going to say that we're on the verge. I mean, what stands on precariously on the balance is civilization isn't older than we think. Now, I don't see a political problem there, but it does change a paradigm, because we'll have to say, well, okay, in that case, what happened? And are we dealing with a civilization that not in just order, but had capacities that has been misunderstood by those that have studied it, the profession have studied it. In other words, was there a higher technology? Was there a higher knowledge? Were their motives different? We're on the cusp, if you like. We've shaken the apple tree, like John West would say. Now let's see what apples fall gradually, because this is where it stands. I think this is the position we're in. And there is a much more receptive public, where, unfortunately, and I have to say this, and you can keep it if you like, unfortunately, there's been a lot of amateurs of the lower level, because we're amateurs as well, I mean, that's not, but there's been too many people coming in and bringing again too many unscientific theories that they cannot be backed properly, and it's kind of filling the market again with too much nonsense, because we want the public to be behind us. We want the public to be behind us, and if the public is confused with too many issues, too many discussions about things that cannot be falsified, and it's very easy for the academics to either ignore it or brush it aside, then they are, in a sense, diluting the effort that is needed to make this paradigm change. So, I feel very strongly about this. I think that we have to be a bit careful about too many people. I'm not against people coming up with good ideas, but too many people coming with ideas that they cannot substantiate and are filling the market with too many books, too many internet websites, and all this. It's kind of overwhelming. It's becoming what I call a flea market research. There's too much of it. So.
Last question, Robert. I've seen some really interesting evidence now with these black marks inside the black marks inside the King's Chamber. I don't know how much you can talk about because the research is yet to be published. But
to be honest with you, I don't know much about it other than what I hear from the man who actually tested this, Dominic Goretz. I've been more interested in trying to get them off the hook with all this stupidity that has been raised about this. But what is interesting is this, okay, I'll put it in a nutshell. The finding of iron in the 4th dynasty is not new. We have two reasons to believe that iron was known in some form or other. It may be low temperature smelting, but there is a plate that was found in a joint in the Great Pyramid. Mm-hmm. And I know Egyptologists are very skeptical about it, but I've examined this plate, I've studied it, and there's no doubt that it's contemporary with the mummy. And it is iron, there's no doubt about it. It has been examined as being low smelted at lower temperature, but it's nonetheless iron. There is, of course, the metal so-called hooks or handles that were on the doors. They're not iron, but they've been shown to be bronze, which is already supposed to have been unknown. So we know this. However, and we know that they use iron for ceremonial reasons. Mm-hmm. For example, they used an iron tool to open the mouth of the mummy. It was called a peshem kef. Mm-hmm. We know that in the pyramid text, they speak a lot about iron, by the way. And there is two things very specific that are mentioned many, many times in the pyramid text, where the pharaoh is supposed to have iron bones after he dies. They're very clear about this. And they talk about an iron throne. The pharaoh is supposed to be sitting on an iron throne as he takes off in some imaginary travel to the stars. So there's no question about this. But we always thought that the iron was used ceremonially. What these guys have found is that they may have been used practically. Mm. That changes the picture. Because now then, it's what I call an advancement. Suddenly there's something that will take us a little bit further forward in understanding what these people are doing. So I can say that as far, if what they're saying is true, and we'll see the results of the tests, then we will have to look at the practical use of iron in their construction methods. And that is very, very interesting.
Robert, please take a moment to give out your website before we go.
Robert Bauval, well, the robertbauval.co.uk. That's my website. You'll find a lot of information there.
Excellent. Robert, I really thank you for your time today.